There I am. Good. Nice to see everybody here. Let's jump right in. I know I have plenty to talk about tonight, so we're talking about rest. So you guys just sit back and rest, and I'll do all the work. And don't worry about how long you've been resting for, okay? So we'll talk about tonight. So by way of quick review, if you were here or if you weren't here 2 weeks ago, we talked about kind of hurry and busyness and chronic busyness is what we called it, and kind of just looked at least some of the negative things that does to us. There's lots and lots and lots, but from anxiety, irritability, exhaustion, which actually in a weird way leads to distraction because we're too tired to do anything besides scroll on our phone or stare at a TV screen or something. And one of the things that we ended up focusing on was that hurry or chronic busyness robs us of our ability to love properly. Can't love other people right. I said I can't love yourself right, which basically means you just don't take care of yourself like you should, and you can't love God right. And that's one of the things that hurry or chronic busyness does, because, like Paul said, love is patient, is the first thing he said. So love takes time, lots of time, and hurry doesn't have it. Hurry is literally the symptom of not enough time. And so when we're hurried all the time, we do not have time to love people properly, which when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he said, love God and love people is essentially what he said, okay? And so that's what we should be doing, and hurry and busyness and chronic busyness doesn't allow us to do that. And we also said that chronic busyness and hurry is a pattern of the world, which Romans 12:2 says. I don't know if I have that on the screen or not, but Romans 12:2 tells us, do not be conformed to this world or to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, is how I had learned it. And one of the patterns definitely of this world is hurry and busyness and distraction and all of that stuff. And it tells us right there, don't be conformed to that, okay? Don't be conformed to the world or to the patterns of this world. So what I want to do tonight is to hopefully look at some practical solutions that we can take to not fall into the rat race of society and hurry and chronic busyness and all of those things and all the bad things that brings along with us. So in other words, we're kind of looking at how we can live in the world of hurry and busy without being in the hurry and the busy, okay, while we're living in that world, which is a difficult thing, okay? So just a side note before we start, because I find myself saying this a lot when we're talking about hurry and busy and all this stuff, a lot of times I say like, man, I wish there was just 3 more hours in the day. You ever said that? Or just a couple more hours in the day, or there's not enough hours in the day, or something like that. But the answer to this problem of hurry and busyness is not more time, okay? Not that we can even produce that anyway, but if we could, the answer is not more time, and on that note, if you're already working, the answer is not just working harder or working faster, okay? So the answer is not more time or working harder and faster, but I was thinking about this, and think about it for a second. Let's just say, hypothetically, you were able to add 4 more hours to the day or something like that, or they invented a pill where you'd only have to sleep 1/3 of the amount of time that you currently have to sleep, all right? So now you have more hours in the day effectively. What would you do with them? Because I know what I'd do. I'd do more stuff. I'd get all that stuff done that I didn't get done before. I'd probably try to preach more sermons. I'd teach more classes, learn another adjusting technique, fix the bath fan that's been sitting there for 9 months on the side that I haven't put in yet, that my wife keeps telling me I need to put in because I need to put it in. I learned the guitar so I could be like Jay or Tammy or something when I grow up, or at least be a proper youth group leader and know how to play guitar, because that's what you have to do to be a youth group leader. Deep clean the house, or 10 million other things that I could be doing, but I would do. I would fill every extra second with more and more stuff, which would actually make me more busy and more hurried and more exhausted and would be more terrible. That would not be a good thing. And so the answer is not more time, and the answer is not to work harder and harder and harder, assuming that you're actually doing some work, okay? So it's not more time, but I think at least one of the answers, and there are many, we could go on for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks about this stuff, but one of the answers is to essentially live not according to the pattern of the world, but live according to the pattern of God, or live according to the design that God has called us to live to. And I think there is a design, and I'm talking specifically when it comes to rest, okay? in this context. There's a lot of designs of God, but we're looking specifically at rest. So one of the things that I have a problem with, oddly enough, is the buttons on my pants just pop off like nonstop. It's this weird thing. I just keep buying defective pants. I can't figure out what's going on, but the buttons pop off all the time. And so it drives my wife crazy because she's constantly having to sew buttons back on my pants because I also can't sew. And so what I do, she's like, what are you doing? And so what I do is I just take, I'm not going to do it because that'd be weird in the middle of standing up in front of a sermon, but I like take one hand and I just kind of like flick my button on my pants and just kind of pop it, through the hole or whatever. And apparently I'm doing that wrong. What you're supposed to do is like use two hands and kind of gently move the button through the hole, and I just flick it through there, okay? And so me not using the button as it was designed to be used causes the button to wear down faster than it should, and eventually causes the button/pants to be kind of defective because it's tough to wear pants without a button on them. And the same thing happens with us. When we start to use our lives in a way that we're not designed to use it, a way that God created us to use them, then we start becoming defective. We start not working as well, and eventually we might just break down, which is what happens to a lot of people, okay, because of chronic hurry and busyness and exhaustion. So what we're going to look at tonight is how, at least a couple ways, to live within the design that God called us to live to in the bodies, in the life that he gave us, okay? So I'm going to pray and then we'll start. Father, we thank you so much for this time together to be here. We thank you so much that you have given us rest. And I pray, God, that for myself and for everybody else here, if we need to take that we do, not just for rest's sake, although that's good, but so that we can do the things that you have called us to do, to love other people, to not be so exhausted that we can't give time and energy that we should be giving to you and to other people. So I pray, God, that you give us rest in this moment as only you can. And I pray, God, that we can figure out or implement some practical ways to find some more rest so that we can live more according to how you've called us to live. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to look at Matthew chapter 11. I think I look at this every single time I've ever given a sermon in my life. It's my favorite Bible verse. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. It says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened," is how I memorized it, "and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Okay, so the question we're going to look at tonight, the first part of the first sentence is the kind of the part that gets us all, the catch, come to me all who are weary and heavy burden, which is fantastic. A fantastic way to say that. But what we're going to look at tonight is more verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Okay, the yoke, if you don't know, basically just ties you right along with Jesus. Jesus is saying, do like I do. That's pretty much what he's saying. So the question is, what does the yoke of Jesus, or the pattern of Jesus, as opposed to the pattern of the world, which Jesus says his is easy and light, that gives us rest for our souls, what does that look like? And again, this is specifically when it comes to practically living out an unhurried, unoverly busy life. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we're going to spend our time with. And they're what I'll call rhythms of rest, which are basically just conscious, purposeful times of resting amidst our probably busy lives. If you have a normal life, it's conscious, purposeful times of resting. And I'll make the argument that there are periods of rest that God not only allows us to take, but that he wants us to take. Okay, and not only that, he's literally woven them into creation, and Jesus himself did these rhythms of rest. So that's kind of what we're going to look at. Before we get to the technical rhythms of rest, by the way, you'll be happy to know I had 5. I went down to 2 because we don't want to be here till midnight, okay? So I kind of picked, I think, it's probably the most practical 2 out of the 5 because, like I said, we already have plenty to talk about. So before we get to the first rhythm of rest, this is kind of like a prerequisite point, I guess you could call it, and I think it'll better help us to be able to implement the rhythms of rest and to do the things that God has called us to do, okay? So the first point that we have is to prioritize, okay? So we need to prioritize our lives. Ephesians 5:15 through 17 says this. It says, "Look carefully then at how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil," the pattern of the world. "Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." So we want to make the best use of our time. Okay, Jesus understood what the will of the Lord was, obviously, and he says, "I only do the will of my Father." That's what he says. So Jesus did this. He made the best use of his time. He was wise with his time. And in a life or a society of hurry and busy and all of that stuff, if we don't prioritize, if we don't take effort, it takes effort. Ironically, when we're talking about rest, it takes effort to rest, weirdly enough. But if we don't prioritize what is actually most important in our lives, and then not just prioritize them, but then actually make them a priority, okay? So you prioritize them and then take the effort to make those a priority. And if we don't do that, we'll get kind of baited into doing what always feels like the urgent in the moment instead of what's the important. Because there's always something there. There's always something urgent all the time in our society. It just goes forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Remember John Ortberg a couple weeks ago, I gave a quote. John Ortberg said, "Hurry is not just a disordered schedule, it's a disordered heart." And that's what hurry is. Our priorities are messed up. And if we don't prioritize what's most important, which again is effectively loving God and loving people, then we'll neglect those for the thousands of other things that are vying for our attention. Whether it's a ding on your phone or the text for your child to be in another sport or the urgent work email that you get or whatever it is. Not that any of those are bad, but if they will take precedent if we don't prioritize what's actually most important in our lives. That's why I love the way Dallas Willard said that we need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry. You need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry because it ruthlessly stalks us. Hurry is there all the time, over and over and over, almost everything we're a part of in this world. Society and culture and work and sports and school and social media and advertising and technology and on and on and on and on and on spurs us toward this idea of more hurry, more, faster, 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 on and on and on. And if we don't take time to actually prioritize, to make intentional, conscious effort to see and put into practice what is most important, then we'll just get lost in the hurry and the busy and the distraction. Okay, and again, this takes effort. This is not easy, although we're talking about rest. That's one of the things that I've learned over trying to do this for the last 10 months. It's not really that easy, but it's worth it. Okay, so how do we do this to prioritizing? I'm going to try to give you guys some practical advice on a couple different things. The first one was actually our homework from 2 weeks ago, so I'm sure it's already done for every single one of you. If it's not, shame on you. But it's basically make a priorities list, okay? So first, make a priorities list. I think I have a picture of that. Do I have a picture of that, Phil? Did I put that back on there? Of what a priorities list, did I even call it that, looks like? Yeah, so there's a priorities list. It's really easy. But the priority on the left-hand side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, that's most important. And then on the other side, you put the time or the energy that you spend on certain things and see if those numbers line up. Does 1 line up with 1? Does 2 line up with 2? If it doesn't, and sometimes it's not going to perfectly, but if it doesn't, it at least gives you kind of a visual to see where you might need to start thinking about changing certain things in your life, okay? So first is make a priorities list. Second is make what some people call a time schedule or a time budget. This is kind of similar to one that helps you see how you actually spend your time. But all you do here is you just take a day. Actually, you're supposed to take all 7 days of the week. And then you start at midnight and you go to midnight. And all you do is write down what you do from midnight to midnight. Okay, and it's a time budget or a time schedule. And again, this will let you just see how you're actually spending your time, not how you think you're spending your time. Okay, and if it doesn't say phone somewhere on there for most of us, you probably did something wrong, okay? So that should be probably in there somewhere, since the average person spends 4 hours a day on their phone. But this lets you see where you spend your time. And second, it lets you see how busy you actually are or are not. Sometimes you might do this and look and say, wow, I actually have quite a bit of free time. And so then the problem might be more on the distraction side. Or you might look at it and say, holy moly, I have literally 0 free time and stuff is actually overlapping here, in which case your problem is probably busyness and hurry. Okay, so again, it just gives you a visual to do this. When I was talking with my daughter that was in 4 sports at one time, just a couple weeks ago, she got done with all 4 sports, and we were up in her room, and she said, man, I thought I'd have tons of free time, then I was done with all 4 sports, but I still don't have any free time. And so we kind of did this time budget thing, and it turns out she's really busy. Even without 4 sports, she's really busy. So with 4 sports, I don't even know how it actually worked. It was mathematically impossible. But somehow it kind of worked. It just didn't work that well, because that's what busy does to us, is makes us not work that well. So that's the second thing you can do, is make a time schedule or a budget. And the third one is make room for margin. Okay, we could do a whole entire sermon on this easily. I actually planned to at one point in time. This was a plan to just talk about margin. But instead, I was going to bring it and I forgot. There's a book called Margin by Richard Swenson. It's a super good book. I recommend you read it. He's a medical doctor, but he's a Christian as well. So it kind of goes through a lot of medical stuff and also with an emphasis on God and Christianity and stuff. But in the book, Swenson defines margin as the space between our load and our limits. Okay, the space between our load and our limits is our margin. It's like the margin of a page. If you ever think of the margin of a page, the edge between where the writing stops and the actual edge of the page. Did you ever think, why do they put margins in a page? They're not to write in, actually, believe it or not, okay? They put margins in the page so that there's a little bit of room for error, okay? Because if you went right up to the very edge of the page and any little single thing went wrong, then guess what? The page is ruined, and really probably the book is ruined. Even though technically it's more efficient and more effective to go right up to the end of the page, it leaves no room for error. And so if something was to go wrong, the whole entire thing would get ruined or be damaged. And it's the same for us. If we run right up to our limits, or we try to go beyond our limits, we have zero margin whatsoever, it doesn't go well for us at all. It leaves no room for any interruption or anytime anything doesn't go perfectly. Later in the book, he says margin, quote, is something held in reserve for the contingencies or unanticipated problems, aka when things go wrong or when there's interruptions, okay? So ask yourself this: how do you typically respond to interruptions? C.S. Lewis had a quote that said something to the effect of, how you respond to an interruption is who you really are. Ugh, hate that quote. I hope it's not true, but C.S. Lewis said something like that. Typically, when I have an interruption, at least historically, it was, what is wrong with you? Do you know can't you see, I don't have time for you. I'm way, way, way too busy. This Facebook post won't write itself, I'm joking, that was a low blow. I'm sure none of us actually ever do that, besides us to our children. But anyway, I read this thing in the first 3 chapters of Mark. It says that Jesus is interrupted 35 different times. Just in the first 3 chapters of Mark. He's interrupted 35 different times, one way or another. And interestingly, Mark is the book that likes to say, and immediately Jesus went, and immediately Jesus went, and straight away they went to. That's how it talks the whole time, and it says he's interrupted 35 times in the midst of that immediate and straight away. Okay, and so we're not going to go through it all because we don't have time tonight, but next time you're reading through the Gospels, which is hopefully soon, just look at how Jesus responds to interruptions, because they're there all the time. Some of his greatest stories are interruptions. He gets interrupted to go heal somebody's child that's dying, and in the middle of that interruption, he gets interrupted by a girl that touches his cloak, and so then he stops, and he's present with the person during the interruption, and he takes time for them. Partly, number one, because he has his priorities right, and secondly, because he has apparently built in margin for the interruptions. And that's what we need to do too. We need to build in margins. If you have some time, I was going to do it tonight, but we don't have time. But if you just look at chapter 1 of Mark. It is a crazy day that Jesus has, and they get to the end of it, and it says the whole entire town comes to his house after this ridiculously busy day, and it says, so Jesus healed them and cast out demons. That's how he responds to interruptions. He meets them, and he's present with the person or whatever it is in the moment. Okay, he prioritized loving God and loving people. I have a story that I don't have time to tell, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So my daughter, I don't even know exactly how the story goes. It's my own daughter, but she was supposed to talk about a routine that she does for school, and I think she didn't have it done maybe or something. I don't know exactly what happened. Surprise, surprise, it's Sadie. And so, but anyway, the teacher came up and asked her about a routine that you have, and she said, I leave my Bible on my bed every night so I can remember to read it every night, and that's one of the routines I make. And the teacher said, well, I read my Bible too, and stuff like that. And so then Sadie came home and made this. I don't know if you can see it, you can't read it, but she made this, and then she made this, and it's a letter, basically a note that says how much God loves you, and it's a note inviting her to come to church because she knows that she reads her Bible. Okay, that's prioritizing what's important. She took time out of her day to make time for somebody else to tell them about Jesus, okay? Not condemning people or trying to make you feel bad, but when's the last time we took effort to do something like this? But that's what we should be doing, and that's what prioritizing and having some margin gives us the ability to do, the things that are most important, okay? So that's my prequel point, which is not good, because we're going to fly through this, okay? So here we go, for your own sake. So now we get to where I really want to talk to you tonight, talk to you about, believe it or not, which is rhythms of rest, okay? Like I already said, conscious, consistent patterns of rest throughout your life, where your job here is to literally rest. That's the job, to rest or rejuvenate, replenish your soul, and trust God in the moments of not working and striving. Okay, I'm calling those rhythms of rest so that we have time and energy to do what's actually most important to do. And again, like I said, I believe God wove these into creation, so we're going to go kind of warp speed here, but if I don't have these on here, you don't need to put them up, Phil, if you don't want to. But if you look at Genesis 1, just really broadly, right away you can see that God wove all types of rhythms into creation, okay? Just the story itself, if you didn't know, is some people say it's a poem, some people say it's not, but it's poetic, if nothing else, if you just read it. And then God said, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, let there be blank, and there was blank, and there was evening, and there was morning on the first day. And then God said, da-da-da-da-da, and it's a rhythm. That's the whole point of it. It's a rhythm through life, and in that rhythm, he is creating all types of rhythms in life, like evening and morning, separating night from day. That's a rhythm. By the way, that's one of the 3 that I threw out. One of the rhythms of rest that we should have is getting enough sleep. Okay, so long story short, you're not that nice when you're sleepy, okay? Neither am I. You're grumpy, and you're not your best you when you're sleepy, and God created you to sleep, okay? Think about that. He didn't have to. He had to make a conscious decision to make you sleep because he doesn't. And so he made a conscious decision to have you sleep for a reason, okay? Without getting into all that, just understand that. God had you sleep for a reason, and so you should do it. The average amount, they say, a night is 8 hours-ish, okay? So we should be getting enough sleep. There's my one point, at least one of the points that I didn't talk about. So he talks about that rhythm. In verse 14, it says he puts lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night and let them be signs for seasons and days and months and years. So he puts these rhythms of seasons and days and weeks and months and years in creation. And inside of all of those rhythms of life that make sense of the world that we live in, he also established rhythms of rest. Okay, part of those rhythms were rhythms of rest. So you don't have to go very far. If you have your Bible open, if you want to turn to Genesis chapter 2, you can. I'll read the first 3 verses very quickly. You'd think it would say in the rhythm, and on the 7th day, God said, let there be blah, 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 and there was evening and morning the 7th day, but that's not what it says. It gets to the 7th day in Genesis chapter 2, and it says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all of his work. And you went too fast, and I didn't see the rest of it, that he had done. Thank you very much. He rested from all he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. Okay, so this is one of the rhythms that God does. How many days are in a week? 7, okay? So this is a rhythm of a week. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. He literally wove that into creation. Work 6 days, take a rest. God himself did it, and there's all types of reasons that we don't have time to talk about tonight. But this is like the bridge in is it called the bridge in music? Is that what that thing's called? You have like chorus, verse, and the thing that doesn't fit very well. Is that called the bridge? I don't know music. I think it is, but if that's called the bridge, that's kind of what the day 7 is. It's part of the song, but it's different than the rest of the song. It doesn't follow the same flow, okay? And that's what day 7 is that we call Sabbath. Okay, so that's one of them. There's another one. Well, there's multiple ones more. If you look in Leviticus chapter 23, which we're not going to read all of, but it speaks of 7 different feasts of the Lord, basically 7 different holidays. I don't know if you guys can read any of that or not, but it lists all 7 of them, and here's what it says in different parts of it, if I can read those. It says, on the first day you shall have a holy convocation, you shall not do any ordinary work. On the 7th day is a holy convocation, you shall not do any work. You shall hold a holy convocation, you shall not do any ordinary work. You shall not do any ordinary work, and you shall present a food offering to the Lord. Da-da-da-da. Do you get the rhythm there? That's the festivals. Part of the festivals of the Israelites were rhythms of rest built into a year. There were certain times where they took a break and rested, and God said, don't do any work on these days. And again, without going into detail on this, because we don't have time to go into detail on them, I talked to 3 different people this week about this idea of what if you just had a couple of weeks or a couple days throughout the year where you and your family or your closest friends or your church or whatever it was just all took a couple days off together. And you know what everybody's response was? Man, that'd be so nice. Wouldn't that just be great if everybody just stopped together and took a rest a couple times a year? Because we know that's what we need in our souls. Okay, it's just good for us, and it's like God knew what he was talking about, and so he built them in to the Israelite yearly calendar. That's what he did there. We don't have to follow those anymore, by the way. That's a whole other thing, but he built those into his people's calendar. Okay? Contrary to what most people think, or what some people think anyways, God isn't some horrible dictator who's trying to steal all of your joy. At times, like we saw there, he's actually trying to get you to stop working, take a break, and relax a little bit. Okay, that's what God is telling them to do there. All right, there's another interesting one that we don't have time to read either, but it's in Leviticus chapter 5, if you want to, or 25, if you want to read that. It's the first 6 verses. It's basically a Sabbath rest for the land. So once every 7 years, the Israelites were not supposed to plant anything anywhere as a Sabbath rest for the land. Well, most of them are farmers, so if you're not planting, guess what? You're kind of doing a little more resting too, because that was your job. And it says in there, the Sabbath of the land shall provide for you. So even in this year of not working, God's saying the Sabbath of the land is still going to provide for you. Okay, interestingly, they didn't follow that. That's a whole other story, and they get exiled into Babylon for 70 years because they didn't follow that for 490 years. And so that's why that is, just in case you ever wanted to know why they got exiled for 70 years. They didn't listen to that rule. And one final one, Leviticus 25, we're not going to go through the whole thing again, but it's the year of Jubilee. So once every 7 of 7s, so he uses 7 a lot, so once every 7 of 7s, the next year, so every 50th year, was the year of Jubilee, where basically everything got erased. All the debts got erased, all the slaves got set free, everything got returned back to their owners, and their land got back to the people. It was a full resetting, another complete reset, like a complete rest of the whole thing. And so again, my point to showing you all of that is just saying God wove in these ideas of rhythms of rest, okay? He did it prescribed, dedicated times of rest, relaxation, and rejuvenation. So my point is, if God, who created you, established these rhythms of rest, do you think it's a good idea that we should probably take them? I hope the answer is yes for that. So we're going to look at 2 here relatively quickly. The first one, rhythm of rest, I'm calling eremos. So it's a Greek word. I think I'm actually verbizing, if that's a word. That's a noun. I'm making it a verb, okay, because I don't know how to do Greek anyway, so I can do whatever I want. And so I'm making that a verb. What it literally means is a solitary, quiet place. Okay, that's what eremos basically means, a solitary, quiet place. And it's used over and over in the Bible to talk about the place that Jesus went to be with the Father. Okay, if you see that in the in the New Testament anywhere and it says Jesus went off to be alone, or Jesus went to the desert, or Jesus went to the wilderness, all of those, every time the word is actually eremos in Greek, okay? So that's what I'm using. And I'm using it as the idea of spending quiet, alone time with God, okay? So I told you Mark 1 was a crazy day, and he gets to the end of it, and it was just a long, what we would probably call busy, very full day. So now think about it. If you had that long, consistently interrupted, full day, what would your next verse look like, okay? Or what would your next morning look like after that crazy busy day? Here's what I thought mine would probably look like. So he got up early the next day and made a list of all the stuff he had to get done that he didn't get done yesterday, plus the stuff he had to get done today, worked like a madman all day, probably stressed and anxious and short with everyone he came in contact with. Okay, that would be Mark 2:1 of Tad Jacoby's gospel, okay? Not great, not good news, I'll tell you that much. And so let's see what it says for Jesus. Okay, this is the very next verse after that very busy day. It says, I think it's, do I have that in there? Is it Mark? I don't have it. Here's what it says. It says, in rising very early in the morning, we're on the same track so far, me and Jesus, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. That's what Jesus did when he got really, really, really busy and had a hurried day. He made sure he went out to a desolate place to be alone with God, and he prayed. It's typically not what happens to me when I get done with a very busy day, but it should. That's the rhythm of rest. This is the yoke that Jesus is talking about that we need to follow if we want to have the rest that he's talking about. And by the way, that word for the desolate place there is eremos. Okay, so that's why I'm using that word. And the Gospels are filled with times that Jesus went to the eremos to be with the Father. Okay, think about that. The Gospel gives basically a snapshot of multiple years of Jesus' life and all the amazing things in there, and it on repeat puts this little part in about him going to the eremos to be with God. Because it's important, and it's what he did in his life consistently over and over. Luke alone uses that word eremos and Jesus going there 9 times in itself. And then in Luke 5:15 through 16, just to make sure we get the point, it says this, yet the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to him and came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness, but Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places and prayed. That's the eremos again. Jesus often did that. In Mark 6, when the disciples were getting so busy that they didn't even have time to eat, and they were probably feeling overwhelmed, Jesus doesn't say, hurry up, work harder, work faster. We got more stuff to do. We got to get this done. That's not what Jesus tells them. And instead, in verse 31, I think I have this in there, it says, then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place, to the eremos, and get some rest. So when the world gets busier and busier and busier and busier, we don't need to go, more and more and more. We need to find time to rest more and be alone with God. That's Jesus. That's basically Jesus' equation to this whole thing. More busy equals more quiet time. That's Jesus' general rule. If you look through it, the busier he gets, the more quiet time he takes with God out in the eremos. Okay, so how do we do this practically? How can we kind of take on this yoke and do what Jesus did? 3 things I think that will hopefully help us to do this. First is have consistency in time, if possible. Have a consistent time that you do this. And before we start, one more little thing to say. I'm going to give you a bunch of practical stuff to do. These are not rules to follow. Okay, so do not think of these as rules to follow, something that you have to do or else, and don't get caught up in the detail or doing it perfect or anything like that, because when you do that, all of these things then just feel like another burden, and they feel like another thing to do, and they just basically suck the life out of you, and you don't want to do them because you feel like you have to do them. Okay, you ever felt like that before? And then that's a great recipe for making sure that you're probably never actually going to do it. Okay, so we don't want to feel like this. It's not a burden. Okay, there's no judgment or condemnation or anything like that. Just start where you're at and do the best you can. Okay, that's what this is. These are rhythms of rest. That's all there is. So there's a piece of advice I got from one of my coaches a long time ago that I use for a lot of different stuff now, and he said specifically, play the game you're in, not the game you want to be in. And that was in context to me basically being confident that all of my other teammates were horrible and I was the only good person on the team because I wasn't arrogant at all at that time. And he said, play the game you're in, not the one you want to be in. Okay, and so I use that in a lot of different things in my life. Live the life you're at, not the one you want to be at. Okay, so if you want to do quiet time for an hour with God, but you're only at 10 minutes right now, do 10 minutes. It's okay. 10 minutes is fine. 5 minutes is fine. Just do the best you can and try to start it at some point in time. These are not laws to follow. Okay, these are just unforced rhythms of grace is what the Message translates Matthew chapter 11, and that's what we want to think of these as, unforced rhythms of grace, okay? But try to be consistent with the time of the day if you can, basically just because it helps to establish a routine. If you do the same time every day, it starts to kind of become a routine. Don't freak out and get all frustrated if that time doesn't work for a day. It's okay. These are just rhythms of grace, okay? We want to just do the best we can with them. So try to have a consistent time. Secondly, try to have a consistent place if possible. Ideally, try to find a place that is dedicated basically solely to doing this. I think the term that a lot of people use now is a prayer closet. Doesn't have to literally be a closet, but try to find a place where kind of the sole thing you do is go and be alone with God and read your Bible and pray, okay? And the reason for that is because if you do it in some other place, the same place where you work or the same place where you watch TV or the same place when you do whatever you do, then there's always going to be the distraction to work or watch TV or do whatever you're going to do. So find a place that is dedicated solely to this, if possible. Again, these are just ideas. Try to have it be a solitary eremos. Try to have it be an eremos, a solitary, quiet place in the middle of the living room with 5 kids and a dog and the football game on that I want to watch and the laundry that needs to be done and da-da-da-da-da is probably not the best place to try to have quiet time. Okay, I need to go away somewhere to kind of be alone for a while. All right, so a consistency in place. And third, kind of already said this, but start small. You don't need to be the best at this. You don't need to be Jesus right away and go out in the desert for 40 days and fast and pray and then get tempted by the devil and beat him, okay? We're probably not there yet. Just go with whatever works for you. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. Again, we need to think of this as a gift. This is a gift where we get to be alone with God. It's not a burden. It's a gift that God is giving us, and that's how we want to think of it. So just try sitting down for 5 minutes and doing it. This is one of the reasons why, I don't know that I should say this out loud either, but I'm going to. So I don't really like the read the Bible in a year thing that much. If you can do it, sure, read the Bible in a year, absolutely. I'm a fan of reading the Bible. I think I say it every single time I'm up here. But when it gets to the read it through the Bible in a year, and then you fall behind in a day, and then 2 days, and all of a sudden you're really behind, you're stressed and anxious, and now it's just a burden, and now you don't want to do it anymore, and you lose the joy of the whole thing of reading your Bible. So instead, just sit down and read a passage, read a paragraph, read a story, read a psalm, and actually focus on it. If you don't get to the second psalm, it's okay, because it's all God's word. And we just want to have some time with him, okay? So start small and just do what you can. Okay, and now what I actually wanted to get to tonight, now that we're out of time, technically, my favorite practice of them all by far, I'm borderline obsessed with it, you can ask my wife, is Sabbath, okay? So the second practice would be Sabbath. Okay, it comes from Genesis 2 that we already read, where God rested on the seventh day. But if you go back, and I don't know if I have this if you bring Genesis chapter 2 back up, verse 3, if you don't, that's okay. But he also says, so let me slow down a little bit here. Sabbath, in its basic form, is just a 24-hour period of rest. That's a 24-hour period of not work. Okay, whatever you define work as, don't care. Doesn't matter to me. Whatever you define work as, it's 24 hours of not doing that. I'm not talking about just not going to your job. I'm talking about not working. Okay, that's what a Sabbath truly is. And so that's what a Sabbath is. It also says 2 interesting things. We'll go very quickly through this, but if you look at the Sabbath in verse 3, it says, "Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy because he rested on it." Okay, so 2 things that God does to this day is he blesses it and he makes it holy. Fun fact, there's only 3 things that God blesses in the entire creation story. Animals, and then he tells them, be fruitful and multiply, give life. people. And he says, be fruitful and multiply, give life, and then a day. And if you expand on the poetic nature of it, I think one of the reasons that he blesses it is because this day gives life. It really does. It's a day of restoring you again. The other 6 wear you down. This one gives you life back. Okay, so he blesses this day, and then he calls it holy. And this is the first thing that's ever called holy that God calls holy in the entire Bible. And it's a day. Isn't that interesting? I'm not even going to say anything more about that. Just let that kind of soak in. He calls this day holy, and he blesses it. So there's probably something to this day. Okay? So, if you go further in this idea of Sabbath in Exodus 16, again, we're not going to read all this for time's sake, but in verse 28, after he sends manna down, then he gives them, this is when they're in the desert, the Israelites, and he sends manna down, and he gives them a second day, or a double dose on the 6th day so that they can actually take a Sabbath on the 7th day, if you know that story. Some of the people naturally don't listen to God, and so God basically gets frustrated, and he says in verse 28, he says, see, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. I've given this to you. It is a gift from me to you. Take it, is what he's telling his people. It's a good thing, so take it. Then in Exodus chapter 20, thing called the 10 Commandments, he makes 10 commandments. One of them is remember the Sabbath. He's not establishing a Sabbath there, mind you, because he says remember. So remember is the idea that it's already there because it was from the beginning of creation. He's saying remember the Sabbath. Okay, so now he makes it a command for his people. And then in Mark 2:27, Jesus famously says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Okay, the Sabbath was made for man, aka this day is a gift to you. It was made for you to enjoy, to be able to rest and restore your mind and your body and your soul. Okay, and so the whole point that I'm trying to make there is God makes this day, weaves it into creation, eventually makes it a commandment. Jesus says it's for us for a gift. It's a good thing. Whether you think you have to take it or not, if it's a commandment or not, and there's a whole debate about that, I don't really care. What I'm trying to say is for a lot of us in a world of crazy busy, we ought to take one. It's a good idea to take a Sabbath. Okay, so we'll end with this. What's a Sabbath look like? Okay, again, most basic sense, just stopping from the normal work of the other 6 days, both physically, obviously, and mentally. Okay, and what I mean by mentally is not only do you not do work, you don't think about the work. Okay, so you don't think about the work that you think you should be doing. You're not doing the work or thinking about the work. It is a day of rest from all the work and from all the thinking about the work. You're not thinking about the office or the emails or the to-do list or all the other things that you have to do. All that's gone. It's a day to just rest. That's the literal word for Sabbath is Shabbat, which means rest or cease. Stop is what it technically means. It literally means ceasing. We're ceasing from rest, okay? Or we're ceasing to rest. We're ceasing from work to rest. The work's for the other 6 days. This day's to stop and rest. All right, that's what a Sabbath is. And that might be the hardest part for some of us to get to the point where we can actually take a full 24-hour period and not work and not worry about the work. That's the hardest part. Not only you're not working, you're not worrying about the work that still exists out there. But again, if we can't do this part and we can't turn our brain off to the work that still exists out there that's for the other 6 days, then Sabbath is likely just going to feel like a burden. It's going to feel like this thing I have to do that I really don't want to do because it's not letting me do the work that I need to get done, and now I don't like it anymore, and it's not going to work very well. That's not how it's supposed to work. It's a gift, a day where we get to just rest. Okay, I have a Winnie the Pooh mug. It's one of my favorite mugs. It's actually my Sabbath mug now, and it says, nothing to do, what a happy thought. And isn't it? Just nothing to do. What a fantastic thought. So think about that. I've already been talking for too long, so go ahead and just close your eyes for a second, take a rest, and imagine a full day where there is no work to do, no work to think about, and no work to worry about at all. Is that a good day or a bad day? It's a great day, isn't it? It's an amazing day. I love that day. My question is, where do I sign up? Okay, and the good news is, you can open your eyes again. The good news is, God already told us we can sign up. He created it as a rhythm of creation. It's called Sabbath, okay? And that's what Sabbath is. It's a day of just resting and ceasing, and there's even more to it, really, where you're actually doing the things that you enjoy and love to do. That's a Sabbath. You just fill it with all of that stuff. It's a good day. It's a really, really, really good day. And again, it's not, well, we'll skip that. Walter Brueggemann has a sentence that I've just come to love. He says this, he says, people who keep a Sabbath live all 7 days differently. And really, when you think about it, how could you not? You got this day once a week, no matter what, no matter how bad things get, no matter how terrible the other 6 days were, you get this one every single week where you get a whole day and you cease from all of that stuff. And you just do all that is good in the world, all of the good gifts that God has given you, and you get that once a week, every week, on repeat. Okay? It's an awesome thing. But the thing is, you know who doesn't take a Sabbath? Okay? Well, honestly, some people don't take a Sabbath because they don't need to, in my opinion. I think biblically, there's my stance on it. If you want it, you don't necessarily need to. You ought to still. But there's a Bible verse that says some people see every day as the same, and some people say esteem one day as higher than the other. And if they're doing it for the Lord, good for them. So some people don't need to because they already have all this stuff that Sabbath brings in their life, and so they don't need a Sabbath. For the rest of us in the world that live in this crazy busy world that we're in, we often don't take a Sabbath because we forget, how do I say this? We're too busy because we get sucked into the rat race of life and we forget what it means to live with God as your creator and sustainer. And so we just go, 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 go. Or we get so caught up in the working and striving for more and more and more stuff, more vehicles, more clothes, more electronics, more toys, more games, more. Or we forget, not all the time, but from time to time, to focus on the gifts that God has already given us instead of focusing on the things that we don't have and think we need. It's a time to focus on all that is good that God has already given us. I think what most of us need isn't more stuff. And honestly, it isn't more time. What we need is to take the time to enjoy the blessings that God has already given us. And that's what a Sabbath is, a rest from the working and a time to just sit and enjoy. So some practical advice. We're going to get out of here sometime tonight. Promise, this is the end. 3 points, again, practical advice on how to take a Sabbath or how to do a Sabbath, or however you want to say it. Number 1 is an acronym. It's CREW. Made it up myself. I felt like Don for a brief second of my life. Felt like Don. I had an acronym that I made up all by myself, okay? And it stands for cease, rest, enjoy, worship. Cease, rest, enjoy, worship. And basically, it's just like an acronym that you can kind of use to filter your Sabbath day through and ask questions. Is this ceasing from what I consider normal work? Yes or no? Is this restful for me? Yes or no? Is this enjoyable to me? Yes or no? And is there an overarching sense of worshiping God throughout the whole entire thing? Okay, and if the answer is no, then that's probably not a Sabbath for you. And if the answer is yes, then it is. And you can see in that, my Sabbath and your Sabbath can look quite a bit different. You might want to get up and watch the sunrise and go out to your garden and do all those crazy things that some people like to do for some reason. I want to sleep in. Okay, and so we're exact opposite, but it's both Sabbath. It's Sabbath for both of us. Does that make sense? So again, don't be legalistic about this thing. You don't have to do that. Just whatever is good for you. Okay, second one, prep. This is kind of a big one. So it turns out if you take an entire day off every single week for the rest of your life and you've never done that before, you're probably going to need to prep a little bit, okay? So there's going to be a little prep that has to go into this, and that's basically what this idea is. Try to take some time to prepare for the Sabbath day by getting certain things done that you think should be done so that you can actually rest, that you can actually stop from the work. Again, this takes work, oddly enough, to be able to rest for an entire day, okay? Interestingly enough, do you know what the day before the Sabbath was called in the Old Testament? The preparation day, because it takes preparation to actually have a Sabbath. So prepare, whatever that looks like for you. There's tons of different stuff. Warning, it might involve, and probably will, cutting certain things out of your life or reprioritizing, like we already talked about before, in order to make a full day to be able to rest. And the last one is, is it no legalism? I changed it so many times. Yeah, no legalism. So again, this idea of Sabbath is not a burden that you're being forced to. We have to understand that. It's not a burden that you're forced to do. It's a gift that you get to do. Okay, that's how we have to think about it, where you stop and rest, whatever that looks like to you, and whatever brings you joy, and whatever brings you closer to God, that's what you do. That is the Sabbath. There's no legalism. That's literally why Matthew 11 that we started with, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. It was in response to the Pharisees making religion legalistic. And so to that, he says, come to me and I'll give you rest. Learn how I do it. And one of the things that Jesus did every single week of his life, perfectly, by the way, was kept a Sabbath. It wasn't the way people thought it should look, but he did it perfect every single week of his life. So remember, the point of all this is not to do something to earn God's favor, to be a better Christian or anything like that. It's just to take up the offer of Jesus, to come to him and take his yoke upon us and learn from him so that we can find rest for our souls. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this time. Thank you that you've given us these opportunities that we can take freely, without feeling guilty, without feeling ashamed, or any of those things, that we can just come and rest, sit in your presence, enjoy the bajillions of gifts, at least in my life, that you have given me. And I pray, God, that if it's something that we need, that we take you up on this offer and that we practice going to the Eremos and being with you daily, that we practice taking a weekly Sabbath. Even if there's no way we can do 24 hours and we know we can't, we have to start with 4, great. Start with 4 hours, at least something where we sit and rest from all the work and just enjoy you and enjoy your creation and all the good things that you've given us. Thank you again for all of those. In Jesus' name, amen.